Hey everybody, it's Dave with Android Police, and this is our video review of the HTC One S. This is the T-Mobile version of the One S, which will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, late April, and we've been using it, or I've been using it the last few days, and I've gotten a pretty good sense of what I like about the phone and what I don't like, and I can honestly say that this One S phone is probably the most important, and the One X to some extent, because they're basically very similar. They're the most important Android phones to come along in a long time. I think these are probably more important and better phones than any of the Nexus phones that have been released to date. There's just so much to like, and I think I'll just start with the biggest thing HTC's been pushing about these phones, which is the design. And so you can see on this phone, the entire back here, it's got this kind of cool gradient silver look to it, is actually aluminum. You do have two plastic panels, this appears to be a radio window right here, and this little cover comes off for your SIM card. It takes a micro SIM, so T-Mobile will have to provide you a special SIM card for this device. But as you can see, it all just looks really flush and well put together, and it is. It's also incredibly light. As you can see, it's also very thin, and that obviously adds to the lightness. It weighs about 120 grams, which is about 25 grams less than a Droid Razr Max, which is definitely a lot. It's no small amount, and when you hold it in hand, you kind of get the feeling that there is something to a light phone. It does feel better to use for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but I do like the fact that it's so light. And my favorite part is just that it's so well put together. The aluminum everywhere is just so much better than plastic. After aluminum, you really don't ever want to go back to plastic. It really is just that much better. And I hope other Android phone manufacturers really follow what HTC's done here with the One series and make phones that won't look like outdated pieces of junk after a year because they get all scratched up and destroyed. So, now, of course, there is the whole issue of the black version of the One S getting chip marks. The black version, of course, has a ceramic coating on it, or ceramic-like, excuse me, it's oxidized. And there have been issues of chipping. This version of the phone does not have that ceramic oxidized surface. It is just a painted aluminum finish. And so there's no chipping on the top. As you can see here, it is all still looking pretty nice. And generally just feels like a very solid phone. And this is the kind of phone that you wouldn't want to put a case on to start because it's so thin and light, you don't want to take away from that, basically. So, what do I like about the phone aside from how it's built? Obviously, Ice Cream Sandwich makes using an Android phone just a whole lot better in a lot of ways. HTC Sense, in some ways, does improve upon that experience. You get things like these little labeled app drawers for apps you've downloaded versus apps that have come pre-installed on the phone. And actually, one of the really cool things is the way you do widget or app additions to the home screens on HTC Sense. So you choose between widgets, apps, etc., and you just tap them, and they go to the currently selected home screen. So I'm just adding shortcuts right now. That is definitely the best implementation I've seen of adding app shortcuts to home screens on Android. And I've seen several now. So that is one big thing that I do like about it. There are some things that you may not like. The whole look of Sense, basically, is something a lot of people aren't big fans of. The way the battery icon looks, the way the settings menu looks, as you can see here. It's got this kind of weird pull-down effect if you pull at the end of a menu. And the icons kind of look cartoonish, a little bit aptly, if you will. So, if you're really, really concerned with how the phone's UI looks, you'll probably want to take one of these for a test drive at your local T-Mobile store and see if you like how Sense feels, because you're basically stuck with it. While HTC does have a bootloader unlock program, for most users, obviously, this isn't something that they're going to end up doing with the phone, so you're basically stuck with HTC Sense UI. Now, that's not nearly as bad a thing as it used to be. In fact, I'd argue that for most people it's a good thing because it makes Android easier, more intuitive to understand. And I think that's really one of the big barriers to Android. And that's why I think this is a very important phone. For the first time, not only is Android easy to use, it runs extremely quickly thanks to Ice Cream Sandwich and this wonderful Qualcomm S4 processor in here, this dual-core crate clocked at 1.5 gigahertz, which just flies along. Everything is so smooth, apart from the occasional glitches in the UI, which it just seems to be a matter of rushing this device to market. Sometimes the app drawer goes out of memory and it takes a second longer to load or whatever. And there's things like the camera, which just show off the power of this processor. It's just absurd. I mean, you can take pictures essentially as fast as you can tap. And you know, that'll eat down your battery pretty quickly, but it is pretty awesome. And I think it's things like this that make the phone so much more usable. You've also got the fact that the battery life on this device is just fantastic too. As long as you're not constantly taking videos and pictures, that will kill your battery pretty quickly. But for everyday use, especially when the phone's idle, power consumption is so much lower than I've seen on any other Android phone. And that really has been a problem with Android phones. This whole reason Motorola released the Droid Razr Max was because the original one had such horrible battery life that they had to come up with a new one with a gigantic battery and then charge people $100 more for it. This phone, on the other hand, has a relatively small 650 milliamp hour battery, and it lasts easily a whole day. If you're, kind of a moderate to moderate heavy usage person, I've got several email accounts linked to this: Twitter, Facebook, Google Currents, a number of other apps that are checking in, basically. And so far, I've been extremely impressed with the battery life. It also charges pretty quickly, and generally, my biggest gripe right now about this phone is probably the display, but the One S is down market from the One X, and the display is where you're probably saving most of that money. And so what I would say about the display on this, if you're indoors or if you're in kind of a shaded area, the display looks good. Not great, good. It's got those saturated Super AMOLED colors that a lot of people do like. They're very eye-catching. In sunlight, it's not very good at all. It's not impossible to see, but we're talking, not even as good as a Galaxy S2 in the sunlight, because obviously this isn't a Super AMOLED Plus panel, the Plus improving sunlight performance substantially. This is just a standard Super AMOLED. So that is one of my dislikes on this device. Another one, and this goes back to build quality, are these two plastic panels. This top one, like I said, pulls off. I'll show you here. It's a pain to get off, and you feel like you're going to break it when you do take it off. And getting it back on is a bit of a pain. I feel like there could have been better ways to do this that wouldn't have required those plastic panels, or at least only one as an antenna window, such as a SIM card slot. The other thing about this phone that a lot of people have expressed dislike about is the amount of storage space. And admittedly, if you need a lot of storage space, this might not be the phone for you, just because it advertises 16 gigabytes of storage. In reality, about 12 of those are usable when you take the phone out of the box. And you can't expand that storage because there's no micro SD slot, which a lot of people have complained about. Personally, I think for most people, a lot of people are streaming their music and movies and media nowadays. Very few people are using, huge amounts of device storage anymore. But if you are wanting something that does have a lot of storage, you'll probably want to go for the One X, which has 32 gigabytes of storage, of which I imagine about 28 would be usable. So if you need a lot of storage, this may not be the phone for you. Aside from that, though, everything about it, like I said, is just so snappy and quick. It's just a joy to use, and it's a joy to hold, and it's just such a great phone. It's everything in the package is fantastic, I think, is what it really comes down to. That's what makes it a really great phone. The camera's great. It does have a few flaws. It's not as good as an iPhone 4S camera, sorry. And while it does have a few kinks in the UI now and then, as far as, things loading up a little tiny bit slowly at times, it's generally extremely responsive. The display is good, and the QHD resolution is definitely good enough for a 4.3 inch panel. It's not 720p, which would be preferable, but at the same time, you'll live with QHD. And the AMOLED does provide excellent colors. Battery life is great. Build quality is fantastic. Never before has an Android phone had all of these things together in one device. And that's what makes the one phone, and basically the One X and the One S, so special, is that you have all these great things together finally. on a final note here, you've got obviously the Beats audio integration on this device, and I don't want to bash HTC too much on this, but basically it makes your music sound a little bit louder and boosts the bass. I tested this with an extremely neutral pair of headphones, a pair of Etymotic Research HF2s, which are extremely neutral and don't pump a lot of bass to start with. And the difference I noticed between switching between a phone, a tablet, and this phone was that the bass became louder and the volume generally increased when I plugged into the One S, playing the same tracks. So there's no adjustable really settings for Beats Audio. You do get, yeah, there's really, you get like, yeah, there really isn't much anything actually in here. I hadn't really played around with it too much, but essentially Beats Audio, I can't really tell that it does much of anything. And you get the logo on the back, and it, like I said, it does sound a little more heavy and bassy. But other than that, it just kind of feels like DSP enhancements and equalization. So I wouldn't say buy this phone for the audio. It's not that it has a bad audio output. I have used phones with bad audio outputs, and tablets especially. And this phone puts out fine audio. It does get a little, like I said, a little more bass heavy. But I don't think it's better than other devices' audio output, particularly. So that about wraps up our video review of the HTC One S.